Hello and welcome to another Tech Talk brought to you by the Albert Lea Public Library. Today we're going to talk about writing effective emails. So now more than ever, we're relying on emails to communicate. Even before the pandemic started, emails were on the rise. A lot of people pay more attention to their email than they do their phone calls. It's just a really easy way to communicate for a lot of people, but especially since the pandemic, people are spending more time on the computer, on screens, especially at work, or organizations are doing like business over emails. And so even communicating with family and friends, you may not be getting together with people, but you may be emailing updates about what's going on, how everyone is. So no matter what reason you might be using emails to communicate, it's important to have them be effective. People are getting a lot more emails than they used to, and so wading through all those emails takes a toll, and so really important emails could get missed if they're not written well, missed or overlooked. And obviously that writing to an email to a family member is very different than writing an email to a coworker at work. So a lot of these tips are going to be focused on more professional emails, but that doesn't necessarily have to be in a work capacity. It can be someone that you may not communicate with on a daily basis and know their style. So I'm going to give you some tips. We'll kind of go through them. I'll talk a little bit about them. So the first one is to know your audience, as I mentioned. So if you're writing an email to your sister who you used to talk to on the phone all the time and now your schedules aren't compatible, your email is going to be very different than if you're writing an email to a coworker who you need them to do something from you. So the first tip, definitely know your audience. Can you use slang? Can you use really short sentences? What are you writing? Think about the purpose of the email and who your audience is and what you want to get out of it. If it's a big family update to everyone, you're sending a mass email to people in your family, that's going to be very different than an email to a coworker asking them to get something done. So keep that in mind. Make sure you use greetings and sign-offs. This is important for emails to everyone. So make sure you say, hello or dear. It's really important to use a greeting and then also a sign-off that can be as simple as thank you, sincerely, take care, something like that with your name. That makes sure that someone knows exactly who the email is to and also who it's from. A lot of people, when you set up your email address, your full name may not show in the subject, in the to field of the email, and so it's important to include your full name so that if there's any confusion, the person you're sending the email to knows who it's from. This is more for work purposes, or professional purposes, I should say. If you're on the board of a nonprofit or volunteer work, make sure you're using the carbon copy and the blind carbon copy when appropriate. So the carbon copy sends the email to whoever's in that email field in addition to the to field, and it also allows the person in the to field to see that someone was CC'd. A lot of times people use this if they want someone else to be aware of the email, but that they don't need that person to respond. So for instance, if you are a volunteer and you need to send an email about a shift, there may be a main volunteer coordinator, and then there may be someone on that shift who you want to alert, something about what happened or maybe you can't make it. So you can do in the to field the main person you want your response from, let's say the coordinator. And then in the CC field, it can be, a shift leader. And then that way, whoever you sent the email to knows that any other interested parties were also included on the email, so they got the information and they don't have to pass it on, but that it was in the CC field, and hopefully the person in the CC field knows that they may not have to respond to that email, but they need to know, that they got it. The blind carbon copy is when you want to send an email to someone and you don't want other people to see who you sent it to. So a lot of times if you have a mass email and for privacy reasons, it's the same email to every interested party, but for privacy reasons, you don't want them to see it. To see who you all sent it to, it's an easy way to send an email to multiple people, and it looks like, it was just sent to the one person and they can't see other people's email addresses. When you're getting to write the email, just some tips for organization, and this goes for every email, except maybe quick emails to a family member or a friend who you email all the time. But even longer emails to some family members you might not email that often, it's important to have a clear purpose. So you want your purpose to be stated in the first few sentences. Provide context if necessary. So if you're writing an email about something else, either provide a link, provide a context, as discussed in this meeting, or as can be found in this article, and provide a link. State your desired intent at the end. Do you need a response from the email? Is there an action item? It's typically referred to. Do you want a reply? Is it just informational? That should be at the very end, because if that's in the beginning, by the time the reader gets to the end of the email, they're going to forget of what the intent is at the end. So purpose, context if you need to, so the person who you're emailing has some idea of what it might be about if they're confused. And then at the very end, before your sign off, please respond to this email by this date, maybe. Or please let me know how you're doing, for a family member or friend, something like that. And then when you're done writing it, just go back and proofread it. Make sure it makes sense to you. A really good way to proofread emails is to read them out loud, and that way you can hear if it makes sense or not. Because you don't have that instant interaction of being on the phone with someone, so you want to make sure that you proofread it, it makes sense, someone who's getting it can make sense, because if they're confused and they write an email back, well, you may not see it for a few days, and so then there's this lag of time between maybe important information that they need and when they have figured out, what the email is about. So a few other tips. Subject lines are very important. With so many emails, a lot of people use the search feature to find an email. So if they need specific information, they're looking for information about a certain project, they're going to type that project into the search bar, and the subject field is what gets searched first. So make sure that you have a relevant subject line. Also, it's important because if someone's scrolling through their emails, they might look at who it's from, but they might also look at subjects to see if it's important. So if it's something important, just make the subject relevant, relevant to what you're talking about. And it's good practice that if you need a response, that you might put it in the to field, like response requested, and that way they know that that's important and they can look at that first. Using bullet points and highlighting action steps, kind of like I mentioned in the last slide, are good practices. So if you have a lot of information to say, rather than typing it out in a paragraph like you might talk about it, if you're on the phone or in person with someone, just use bullet points, list out what they need to know. It's a lot easier to follow bullet points on an email than it is to read a paragraph. And that you can put any intent, like if you want a response by a certain date at the end. Some people choose to highlight that in their emails if they think it's going to get lost. That's kind of up to you. I prefer to just put it at the end and hope that the person sees it and then follow up if needed. Keep your email short and to the point. People usually don't have time to read a 4-paragraph email. So make sure that it just contains one subject. Our next point is don't send an email about multiple subjects. One subject, because if you're searching for something in your email, but it's buried in an email about something else, that's not good. So keep your emails really short, to the point, relevant information. Get what you need out there. Use bullet points if you need to, but keep them to one subject. If you're going to email the same person right after that about a different subject, just write a different email, because a lot of times someone might answer one question and just forget about the rest. So one email, one subject. Tone is very important in an email. This goes with knowing your audience. You want to make sure that the tone is appropriate for who you're emailing. Again, you're emailing your sister. You talk to her all the time on email. You can have kind of more of a joking, casual tone. You're emailing someone you might not work with a lot. You want a little bit more professional tone, because there aren't a lot of clues for someone reading an email as we do in person. So when you're reading an email, it comes across very different than when you're talking on the phone with someone. You can usually tell someone's tone of voice. You can sometimes tell if they're smiling or not if you're talking to them on the phone. Obviously, if you're talking to someone in person, you can read facial expressions. So it's really hard for tone to come across in an email than it is in person. So just make sure that the tone is appropriate for who you're emailing. And then avoid excessive punctuation, a lot of emojis, just good practice. Even if you're emailing someone you talk to all the time, if there's a lot of excessive punctuation, a lot of times they won't read it, or your message might get lost because there's so much punctuation. It's such a distraction that the message of, what's going on in your family that you want to talk to someone about just gets lost because there's too many exclamation points, things like that. So, especially today, people are getting a ton of emails. A lot of emails are going around. Inboxes are getting flooded. There's a lot going on, and so there's a lot of missteps in terms of, an email comes through, it gets lost in the inbox, or you read it and then you forget, So writing effective emails is really important, especially in the situation that we are in currently. So I hope these tips have given you some information and some things to think about when you are writing emails for all different reasons, for family, for friends, professional reasons, more casual reasons. I think all of these tips are things to think about so that you can write effective emails and be an effective communicator through email. So we will be back on the first Wednesday of October with another Tech Talk on a totally different topic. But thank you for watching. And again, this is brought to you by the Albert Lea Public Library.